We first met Tom for a coffee to share in his research in Joseph Shaughnessy, and 6 hours later in Kitty O'Shea's Irish pub, over more than a few check beers, with Tom agreeing to write the article for today's booklet and also to speak at today's event. And as you'll see from the 20-page article Tom's written, he does more than justice to one of Celtic's founding fathers. So thanks very much, Tom, for that. We're delighted to welcome also another lawyer, Colin Shaughnessy, ex-lawyer.
Yeah, you time out for good behaviour, he says.
Tom will speak on behalf, Colin will speak on behalf of the family. As we always say, the most important people at any ceremony are the family. So we welcome them here today. Let's give Colin and the family a warm welcome. We then get the chance to lay some flowers on the grave before I'll close the ceremony with some words of thanks. And Tom will then say the eternal rest in the absence. We couldn't get a priest today, unfortunately. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom is going to cover most of the aspects of Shaughnessy's life in detail, so I'll offer just a different perspective. In the summer of 1906, the Celtic support had many reasons to be cheerful. We had just clinched our second league title in a row. It was to be the first of our 3 6-in-a-row triumphs, as we more than matched the so-called biggest clubs in the land. Then, in the summer of 1906, just after the season had finished, tragedy struck as Michael Dalbeth, our first honorary patron, proposed by Joseph Shaughnessy in 1889, died on the 30th of May, and John Glass, our first ever president and founding father of Celtic, died just 3 days later. The Celtic support were reeling, but there was more heartbreak to follow when Joseph Shaughnessy also passed away on 15th of July, again well before his time, aged only 56. In just 6 weeks we lost 3 of our most cherished men. Football was forgotten about for a while. Even worse was to follow for the Shaughnessy family, as Joseph's wife Mary lost her battle for life on the 31st of June, just 16 days after Joseph Shaughnessy passed away, and it was said that the shock of his death completely frustrated her. We must mention that Mary is also buried here alongside her husband. Also lying at rest here is Joseph Shaughnessy's older brother William, who became a priest and died in 1897, aged just 50. There's 2 more members of the Shaughnessy family buried here today as well. Angus Dorald, buried in 1916, and Joseph in 1946. We've got to remember all the family that's buried in here. But the story does not end there, certainly not for the Shaughnessy's, and not for their connection with Celtic, the club they helped to found. For in 1911, Joseph Shaughnessy's son John joined the Celtic board. He was also a lawyer, and he was to serve the club right up until his death in 1952, making him the longest serving Celtic board member at 41 years, beating Tom White by 2 months. So not only is the Shaughnessy family got a founding father in their ranks, they've also got the longest serving board member at Celtic. The Shaughnessy connection with Celtic still does not end there, as James Farrell, a partner in the Shaughnessy law firm, was invited onto the Celtic board, and he was allowed to purchase 534 former Shaughnessy shares which had been held in trust. James Farrell remained on the Celtic board for 30 years, so the Shaughnessy connection remained strong right up until 1994. But of course the story doesn't end there either, because Jim Craig, the Celtic Grave Society patron, is no less than Jimmy Farrell's son-in-law. So it could be said that the Shaughnessy connection with Celtic lives on to this day. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tom Davison.
Again, Thornley, first of all, by thanking the committee of the Celtic Grave Society for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. It's humbling to be here in the presence of Colin Shaughnessy, one of the living links with Joseph Shaughnessy, and also it's a place where so many other people associated with Celtic have been buried. If I could make a wee quotation from the great County Monaghan poet Patrick Kavanagh, what I think is appropriate. I have lived in important places, times when great events were decided. That says, I think points to the kind of person that Joe Shaughnessy was, and the kind of impact he made. His came into the world as a stone, as is said in the stone. And 3 days later was christened at St Mary's, a place dear to our hearts, where our own club was of course formed some years later. He lived most of his life in Rutherglen, and in fact almost all his life, so far as I can determine, was spent within about 2 miles or so of Celtic Park. His parents first appear in the Catholic Church's records round about 1847. The date may well be significant because it tends to indicate to me there's no record of her having married in Scotland. John Shaughnessy and Mary Murphy were married when they came here, so it tends to suggest to me that they came here to flee from Angorta Moor, the Great Famine. I believe they came from Connaught, possibly from County Galway, and as many of you will know from the Atlas of the Great Irish Famine, which came out about a year or so ago, Connaught was devastated more than any other of the 4 green fields which constitute Ireland. In Connaught, 23% of the entire population of Connaught in the year 1845 perished in the famine. Many thousands more, probably the Shaughnessy's among them, had to flee in order to try and make a life for themselves elsewhere. So some of the early days that the Shaughnessy family spent in the west of Scotland still remain obscure. However, when Joseph was perhaps about a year old or so, the family moved to Rutherglen. For reasons I haven't worked out yet, John Shaughnessy became the tenant of a pub, the Grapes Inn, which stood on the main street in Rutherglen, in front of what's now St Columkille's Chapel. He ran the pub for many years. The pub was a success, and he, an intelligent man himself, managed to educate all the children. Encouraged some of them in music and other pursuits. Joseph Shaughnessy went to St Aloysius College like several of his brothers. Very pious Catholic family. 3 of the Shaughnessy's, including Father William, who, of course, as Brendan says, is buried here, went to Blair's College. One, John Jr., sadly died at Blair's one Christmas. The other son, Patrick, who went there, fell seriously ill at Blair's, had to abandon his studies, returned to Rutherglen, and later at about the age of 17 or 18, had to take over the management of the family business to save to keep it going. The Shaughnessy's were very strong supporters of the church, and indeed I've said in the pamphlet that John Shaughnessy was called upon by the church and by Father Shaw, who at that time was in St Mary's Calton, to identify the site on which the present St Columkille's Chapel is built. Joseph Shaughnessy prepared during his life to do good by stealth, but he was a founding member of St Vincent de Paul Society in St Columkille's parish just a few months before Celtic was founded. And in that capacity, he and another prominent Catholic in Ruglonian, James Quigley, who ran a draper's emporium, were responsible for running occasional feeding stations for children, mostly the families of miners who were affected by strikes and lockouts. It is likely that Joseph Shaughnessy put his own hand in his pocket without saying a word to anyone, and kept a lot of these families' kids alive during times of hardship. He also, very significantly, along with Dr. John Conway, another important man in the early history of Celtic, founded what's now the Scottish Catholic Observer newspaper. He and Conway's brother James, and a number of others got together in 1884. There hadn't been a Scottish Catholic newspaper since the Glasgow Free Press, a very prominent Irish nationalist paper, folded about 1867 or 68. But they didn't get the official backing of the church. Shaughnessy wrote several times to Archbishop Eyre, the then Archbishop of Glasgow, but possibly impressed by past controversies which involved the Free Press, his church never formally supported it. If you look at the list of shareholders in the Scottish National Archives in Edinburgh, it is almost a roll call of people who were associated with our great club in its early years. J.M. Nellis, the Glass brothers, Peter and John, James Quillen. Many of those names appear in the early records of a newspaper. And when Joseph Shaughnessy gave up being the company secretary, due probably to pressure of business, one of the people who followed him was another great name in the history of our club, Michael Cairns, who sadly died, as we all know, very young. The paper had a very, very interesting line. The paper was intended, first of all, to be a Catholic paper, to promote Irish Home Rule, to promote Scottish Home Rule, and to promote land reform, an important cause for the Irish, thinking of the state of land distribution in Ireland, and a cause very, very dear to the heart of our dear patron, Michael Dalbeth. Michael Dalbeth was, above all else, not just a great Irishman, but a prominent mover, an agitator for land reform. So Joseph Shaughnessy probably attended St Mary's School as a young child. We don't know. There wasn't a Catholic school in Rutherglen until about 1858 or 59. He certainly was in St Aloysius College by about then, based at Charlotte Street, by about the age of 10 or 11. Unlike his brothers, he didn't go on to Blair's. I think he probably stayed on at St Al's till about the age of 16 or 17. And at that point, a man, George Gray, a Protestant, and probably an elder of the Church of Scotland, helped him get a job at a time when the professions in Glasgow and roundabout were barely open to Catholics. He ended up working for a firm in West George Street as an apprentice lawyer, and a few months afterwards he started studying at Glasgow University. The course was generally done over 4 or 5 years, but given his family circumstances, his early marriage, the birth of his son John, who sadly died aged only 3 or 4, his studies were interrupted, and he didn't fully until began to practice in his own right till he was about 26 or 27. Afterwards, he began to put together a remarkable law practice. He specialised mostly in civil tort law, but was involved in a number of prominent criminal trials, including, as I said in the booklet, for some dynamiters who tried to blow up a gasometer near the banks of the Clyde, somewhere west of the Gorbals. He worked a very, very great deal for the miners. John Shaughnessy, his father, had a hall in the main street in Rutherglen, which he gave free of charge to miners, to trade unions, to cooperative societies to hold meetings in. John Shaughnessy may indeed, purely hypothesis, he may indeed have been a miner himself for a while. Be that as it may, Joseph Shaughnessy became friendly with Alexander MacDonald, who was the first great leader of the Scottish miners. He did a massive amount of work for them. He became one of the top 2 or 3 experts throughout the whole of Britain and Ireland on workers' compensation. The prototype of what we now call health and safety law, acted in a lot of compensation cases, and I'm fairly sure in a lot of cases did so at very little reward, to himself. He became very prominent in local politics. He served as a Catholic Church's representative on the parochial board in Rutherglen and in the school board. One of his first acts in the school board, as I mentioned in the booklet, was to press the school board to give proper wages and conditions to the school board's officer. He became elected to Rutherglen Town Council. The Rutherglen Reformer, a paper to which he was close to and to which he actually contributed, including, I believe, stories about Celtic. Might be worth an investigation there, Brendan. Had to try to promote his election as a kind of radical liberal against significant opposition. After one attempt, the Reformer came out and said it's time the Catholic population of our borough had one or two people representing them. And Joe Shaughnessy was then elected. He made it onto the council, and the record of what he did in the council is impressive. He was a great believer in municipal ownership. He pressed for new parks to be created, leisure facilities, better environmental protection, proper leisure facilities for kids, grants to football teams, fair rights, as I mentioned, for people who work for the council. The first campaign he was involved in for the council was agitating for the poorest of the poor in Rutherglen to have access to running water. Believe it or not, in the mid to late 1880s, there were dozens of people in wee tenements, wee single ends in Rutherglen who had no water. Joe Shaughnessy fought for those people and for many others. He was also, of course, a significant protagonist of the cause of Ireland. He was a member at various times of three branches of the INL, ending up in the very radical and generally very left-wing Home Rule branch, and he represented the Home Rule branch on various occasions, including, along with Mick Dunbar, another name familiar from the early Celtic history, and Hugh Murphy, at a great convention of the Irish race in Dublin. But, of course, we're here to remember him principally for what he contributed to our great and still happily ongoing football team. Shaughnessy was called on by Brother Walfrid to participate in the committee which formed Celtic. He had no previous connection with football whatsoever. His interests were bowls and cycling. He hadn't lived in East End since he was 1 year old, and he hadn't been a member of the SVDP for very long. But obviously, Brother Walfrid saw enough in Joe Shaughnessy to see that he was a man he wanted on board to contribute to Celtic. He went on to serve in the committee for 10 years. Selfishly, I mean, at a time when committee officials earned no salary, he, 1 year, having a family to support, an important business to run, other commitments, attended something like 80 Celtic meetings, committee meetings, for which he received no reward whatsoever. And in fact, his involvement with Celtic led him to be regularly vilified. People simply did not realise what Joe Shaughnessy did for Celtic, and I hope that my booklet helps put the picture right to an extent. Significantly, Dr. Conway and Joseph Shaughnessy were the two men who opened the first Celtic Park on the 8th of May 1888. They led out Hibernian and Cowlairs, the first match at the original Celtic Park. I see that as significant. It's not only a case of Walfrid and the committee saying, this is your reward, you've done well up to now. I think it's an important landmark in the Catholic history of Glasgow and the west of Scotland. I think this was a symbol. This is saying, we're on the move here, we're on the rise. by having Conway and Shaughnessy there, well known in Glasgow circles, prominent, relatively young professional men, this was sending out a smoke signal. The view I've got of Shaughnessy is very much a revisionist one. If any of you were brought up in James E. Handley's book on Celtic, as far as it goes with the first decade, I've come to disagree with it very, very radically. Obviously, we know where James Handley was coming from. Like Brother Walfrid, he himself was a Marist brother. He was very, very upset, as indeed have been many of us, that Walfrid's legacy appeared to be betrayed in later years. I regret that myself. As someone of the same kind of political tradition of the Murphy brothers and Ned McGinn, who were very, very active in trying to promote the interests of the charity in the early and mid 1890s, I know exactly where they were coming from. However, I think, although he was a very, very significant historian, he distorted the facts and didn't tell other facts. Handley described Celtic as a dripping roast. There is no way in the 1890s that Celtic was a dripping roast. In one particular year, the first time that the club had gone over £5,000 in revenue, the committee held back for the following season £14 9 shillings. A quarter of 1% of what the club had brought in was available to be carried forward to the next football season. As I've said, none of the committee members made any money out of it except the treasurer, who got voted an annual honorarium at the club AGM. No way either was Celtic a dripping roast to the bank. At one point, Celtic owed the Clydesdale Bank around £2,000. Now, Brendan picked me up from the Mitchell this morning, and one of the facts I found in the Mitchell, quite by accident this morning, related to Sunderland FC. In 1896, about the time we are talking about, Sunderland nearly went under, having a debt of £1,000. Celtic owed nearly £2,000 to the Clydesdale Bank. It owed money to the contractors who built the current Celtic Park, and it probably owed significant amounts of money also to the members, who included Shaughnessy. At one point, after an AGM, John Glass was obliged to call upon the members present to put their hands in their pocket and lend money to the club on the night to help keep Celtic going. So there was no way the club could have been a dripping roast to the bank. In fact, as I've tried to set out in the booklet, the club would have been a worry and a liability to the bank. If we take it, as Pat Woods and Tom Campbell have calculated, that at one point 70% of the club debt was due to the Clydesdale. That was about 1895 or so. 70% of £2,000 odd owed to the Clydesdale. If you're giving the Clydesdale was demanding 4 or 5% interest on that £1,500, that is £60 or £70. There is no way the Clydesdale Bank were doing anything other than indulging Celtic at the time, and I would be very, very interested indeed if I could find any records in the Clydesdale Bank's archives showing their relations with Celtic. At one point, Shaughnessy hinted very, very strongly to the AGM that the bank was trying to foreclose. If the bank had foreclosed, Celtic would have gone down. Shaughnessy personally would have gone down. Shaughnessy guaranteed the lease of Celtic Park, and he was also, along with William McKillop and John O'Hara, one of the guarantors of the debt to the bank. I mean, these are men who put themselves at considerable risk. If Celtic had gone down, they were going down with it. They put their hands in their pockets to put money into the club and gave far more than just their time. On a slightly lighter note, it's interesting to note that Shaughnessy was called upon, along with John McLaughlin, after one of the great early Celts, Sandy McMahon, absconded to England. The Rutherglen reformer, perhaps getting a story from Shaughnessy, announced one day that he and another Celtic player had absconded and were about to go to sign for the Notts Forest. Shaughnessy, in fact, things get steadily worse because the leading centre forward McMahon, Johnny Madden, absconded to England as well. Shaughnessy and McLaughlin were sent there to do the business, and lo and behold, within about a fortnight, they were turning out again in the green and white. He also probably was the architect of the scheme which avoided the professionalism rules. Celtic, no question, was a professional football club from the start. It was always intended to make money, originally, as we know, for the benefit of the poor children's dinner table. But to make money, it had to speculate. It was counterintuitive. You or I would start a football club by putting jackets down in a park or hiring one of the 100 pitches at Glasgow Green. Celtic did it from the top down. That needed an awful lot of money, an awful lot of work, and an awful lot of effort. Shaughnessy and the committee realised there was a need for the club to be run on a proper professional basis, in the way that a lot of the football clubs, rugby clubs, cricket clubs already were in England. That was what the basis of what the proposed limited liability company was all about. It was partly to put things on a proper business basis, partly to satisfy the bank, and partly just to get the affairs, including the debt, sorted out once and for all. I mean, already, even 8 or 9 years after the club was founded, Stephen Henry, the most senior official of the St Vincent de Paul Society in Glasgow and a Justice of the Peace, was pleading with the AGM to do something to put the finances in order and to get the debt down. The aim, not that we were spending money in a bad cause. Indeed, McLaughlin and Shaughnessy told the annual meetings of our club their aim was to have the best football, properly paid players, and they envisaged the best stadium in the world. Nothing but the best for us. At the end of the day, Shaughnessy was one of a number of men who, apart from the time, effort, money they put in, they helped keep the lights on. Having looked carefully at the evidence, Shaughnessy was one of the most important figures, not only in our club's early history, but almost certainly in the club's 130 years of history. Without Joseph Shaughnessy, and without a handful of other men around him, Celtic probably would not have made it through the first decade. There would have been no Celtic, or at least a very, very different Celtic from the Celtic we've come to know and love. We owe Shaughnessy and his contemporaries a very, very great debt indeed, and it's very, very fitting indeed that we should be here to honour his legacy today. May his soul stand at Almighty God's right hand.